And countries are weighing up whether they want to take up those invitations to join the U.S. president's Board of Peace. The U.S.-led initiative is being billed as a new mechanism for resolving global conflict. China has confirmed receiving its invitation, but has not confirmed if it will accept or decline. Also on the list, Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin says it's studying the proposal and will need clarification before it makes a decision. Washington's offer comes even as Moscow has yet to accept a U.S.-backed peace deal aimed at ending its 4-year war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump has threatened a 200% tariff on French wine and champagne imports after President Emmanuel Macron said no. Acceptance, though, from Hungary and Morocco. Israel and Ukraine have also been invited to join this board. The initiative was originally designed to supervise the next phase of the Gaza peace plan, but has since taken on a much larger remit. A draft charter describes the Board of Peace as an international organization seeking to promote stability, restore lawful governance, and secure enduring peace in conflict zones. Critics, however, have likened it to a pay-to-play version of the UN Security Council. Mr. Trump himself will chair the board, with members serving up to 3 years. Membership can be renewed at Mr. Trump's discretion, unless countries contribute at least $1 billion in funds in the first year. Singapore also getting its invitation from the US to join its Board of Peace. The Foreign Affairs Ministry says it's currently assessing the invitation. Experts, meanwhile, have expressed caution.
If the rules-based order is in decline and dying, are we now encountering and witnessing the birth of a whole bunch of new rules in a new order? And how quickly should Singapore jump into being part of that? Having a good influence, perhaps, contributing to what those rules are in the interest of small countries like itself.
And we're joined by Dr H A Hellyer. He's Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence. Dr Hellyer, we heard Singapore's response there, not usually in the same sentence, let alone the same table. Israel, Ukraine, Russia, the European Union, Belarus. They are divided on many issues, but they're united in all wondering what to do with this invitation to join the Board of Peace.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the program. Always a pleasure to be here. I think it is an interesting situation to be in, because it's not an invitation that one can necessarily say no to without encountering some sort of price. And we saw earlier today, late last night, that when President Emmanuel Macron of France made it clear that France would not be joining, that the response from Trump was, okay, I'm going to slam 200% tariffs on French wines. So the invitation isn't simply, would you please join, and wouldn't it be wonderful if you joined? Rather, it's join, and you have to pay $1 billion. And if you don't join, then there may be consequences. So it's this sort of, cowboy kind of diplomacy that is becoming the norm when it comes to the White House. Whether or not one ought to take seriously everything that is said in the midst of those press conferences in response to reporters is another thing. But it does show a desire to move past relying on the UN Security Council and create something alternative, something in parallel, which unsurprisingly will have Trump in the United States in a much more powerful position.
So we are looking at 1 year of Mr. Trump in office. These instances you just pointed out, are we seeing now a very clear playbook of Mr. Trump 2.0?
Well, there is a playbook here. It's just one that we haven't really seen in a couple of centuries. The playbook is one that existed before the League of Nations. It's one where nobody had any pretense about an international rules-based order, where things were far more fragmented. And the situation is quite different now. When you think about the 19th century, the 18th century, the ability of great powers on one side of the planet to impact the developments on the other side of the planet, for example, were limited by technology. They were limited due to distance. This, frankly, is not the same at all right now, which is why when you see these fragmentations that have been going on, I have to say, for quite some time, and one shouldn't forget the genocidal war that was wrought on Gaza in terms of how that called into question the rules-based order. Crimea, Russia's invasion of Ukrainian territory long ago, in 2014, the Iraq War. And you can mention a number of other instances, but I think that much of the world held to the idea that, okay, it's a hypocritical rules-based order. The main proponent of it and champion of it, the United States, is not perfect in its track record. But at least there's something there. It's got holes, it's cracked, but it generally works. And I don't think that people have that impression anymore. I think that you've seen on the European side a real realization of this over the last few months, in part because of Greenland, but it's a realization I think a lot of the world came to over the last few years in particular.
Dr. Hellyer, you have been very clear in the past, certainly calling out these double standards. But now, given this administration at the White House, we could say better double standards than no standards at all.
That is one of the critiques, right? That there was a rules-based international order. It suffered from a great amount of hypocrisy. There were double standards on particular issues. So when we talked about Russia's invasion and occupation of Ukrainian territory, at least within the West, we were very clear, rightly so, I think very rightly so. But when we talked about Israel's invasion and occupation of Palestinian territory, and then, of course, Lebanese, Syrian territory as well, we didn't have the same sort of vehemence, at least within the West. So double standards, sure. The critique now is that indeed maybe better that we had double standards and no standards at all. But I think that we have to also move beyond that kind of critique. What is the world being governed by right now? It's very transactional. It's incredibly fragmented. So if that's the case, if that's the state of play, if that's the world in which we live, then how do countries then operate in a way that minimizes damage and tries to hold back the ravages of war and crisis and conflict on the most vulnerable? You can't simply keep on saying rules-based order, international law, when clearly they don't work without political will behind them. So does that mean a fragmentation on the level of, okay, in certain for certain countries, we're going to uphold our treaties and our alliances because we know that they would do the same, but with others, we're going to be much more transactional? I don't know the answer to this question. I know that it's a question that within Europe, many are having, especially on the leadership level, particularly with regards to Russia and the recognition that the United States is not the most reliable security guarantor. I know that within the Arab world as well, where I happen to be at the present moment, there have been these concerns for quite some time. So there's a recognition that this is going on. I'm not so sure there's a consensus about what then to do about it. Certainly not on a regional basis, let alone an international one.
Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Dr H A Hellyer, Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence. You speak to us from Cairo.